Should you buy Tiny Combat Arena? In today's video, that's what we're going to cover. Tiny Combat Arena is essentially a stepping stone game, and for the low price of $14.99, it is going to allow you to discover your passion for flying at a relatively low price. Tiny Combat Arena is not a game that you're going to spend hundreds of hours on, nor is it a game that is relatively complex. It is a game that I would call a stepping stone game because it's going to allow you to branch off into more complicated simulators and discover that passion for flying. That passion for flying is what's going to keep you coming back to either Tiny Combat Arena, War Thunder, or even Digital Combat Simulator. All of those games offer something unique, and Tiny Combat Arena, or TCA, is one of those games that's just super beginner friendly, but if you're an experienced simmer, it's probably best to look past this game. Now, one of the major selling points, and it's probably the thing that attracted you the most, because it also attracted me as well, are the stylized graphics and the fact that it's a Sim-lite flight simulator. Tiny Combat Arena is a game that just works, and I think that's another major selling point for it, because there's tons of early access games out there that don't really work, or they don't have all their mechanics completely fleshed out. So the one thing you know that's going to happen with this game is that the weapon systems are going to work. You have air-to-ground missiles, you have air-to-air missiles, you have cannons, you have anti-aircraft systems, and you have cluster munitions, all kinds of weapon systems, and they all work. You don't need to worry about the early access bugs because everything basically works relatively seamlessly. And honestly, that could be one of the major problems because you can't really blame your poor performance or your piloting abilities on the game and it not working. But as we all know as pilots and sim enthusiasts, it is the game that is wrong, and if the plane would have done exactly what I instructed it to, it would have worked out perfectly fine. So to briefly summarize this whole review, which I think is really important, Tiny Combat Arena is a game. It's currently priced at $14.95. The gameplay loop boils down to go here, blow this up, and have a good time. Now, while that sounds a bit lame or just underwhelming, everything works, and I think that's the major selling point for any early access game, is that it works. Although Tiny Combat Arena is lacking a lot of content, there are a lot of work in place holders, and overall it does feel underwhelming at times. Definitely not overwhelming, but underwhelming. As this channel it mainly focuses on military strategy, tactics, and doctrine, and applying it to strategy game, I do feel like it's briefly important to touch on this subject. Tiny Combat Arena is all about the fun and the fun factor, and you can implement some solo tactics. Anything beyond that just isn't going to happen. You can attempt to simulate seed, but the primary attack weapon systems will be Mavericks, as I'm not sure there's anti-radiation missiles within the game that will act as air-to-ground missiles. There are some radar-guided missiles, but I'm not sure if they'll target those surface systems. I found that I was having the most fun when using the AGMs or the Mavericks, the air-to-ground missile systems, although their range is quite short, so there is a bit of tactics to be used when implementing that system, because they will fall short of the target and kind of just crash into the ground. So I do wish there was something in the database that said how far they could shoot or how long or how far they travel. There may be something, but it's not something that I dug too much into. Now it's time to define what Tiny Combat Arena is. Tiny Combat Arena is a Sim-lite flight simulator, and I'd argue that even Sim-lite is a bit of an overstatement. But that could also be one of the game's main selling points beyond its stylized graphics, which more than likely caught your attention as they caught mine. Tiny Combat Arena is not a simpler version of DCS, nor is it a replacement, but Tiny Combat Arena does have a campaign with a fair amount of replayability, but overall it is a bit lackluster. Tiny Combat Arena has one flyable aircraft, and it's the AV-8 Bravo Harrier, which includes both vertical and horizontal takeoffs and landings. The only two modes that are available to play are the quick missions and the arena campaign. As the pilot, you'll be able to select from several loadouts, varying from air-to-ground to air-to-air, and everywhere in between, which is just mixed. For some reason, there are fuel tanks. I'm not quite sure how those are going to be implemented yet, but it's worth noting. Out of those two modes, the Quick Battle Builder has three options: Free Flight, Dogfight, where the AI only has the ability to use cannons, and Strike. Each of those modes allow you to start in varying locations and bases, so you could start in the air and just immediately go into the merge with an AI, or you can start on the ground at an air base where you can opt to either take off horizontally or take off vertically. Granted, those are the minimum expectations I would expect the AV8 Bravo to have in any sort of game, and really any flight simulator. Whereas the campaign, you complete a series of missions that are strung together, and these missions are basically go here, blow this up, and support this offensive. Now, none of that is bad, but it does lead to some repetition, and oftentimes the AI, your friendly AI, tends to get hung up before capturing the objectives. At the end of the day, the most challenging thing a pilot is going to experience is landing the aircraft over and over and over again. If anything, Tiny Combat Arena is an exercise in just landing your aircraft repeatedly, because you'll often need to refit, refuel, and return to the fight. And in order to do that, you need to land at the closest air base. Now it's time to talk about the good. Note to self, only mention the good. As I stated earlier, we all bought this game because of the stylized graphics and the relative simplicity of the gameplay. Sim-lite is all the rage right now because it's a good middle ground between realism and arcade. Pilots will get a bit more complexity and realism while not having to sit and study a 300-page manual. The database is another wonderful thing that I wanted to point out. Although it's not a complete replacement for the manual, it does add a bit of authenticity to the game, and it allows you to explore the weapon systems that are currently on display, even though some are missing. But it's important to note that it is not a replacement for a manual or a tutorial. The bad. This is where I can talk all about the things that bother me, and this is mostly opinion based, although there are a few things that need to be fixed and should be fixed because they're relatively minor. One thing that's really going to hold this game back, because as of right now, in my opinion, it is mainly a tech demonstration where it just shows the capability of the game while not really offering much of a gameplay loop or incentive to play the game. Yes, you can play games and have fun without scoring or missions or objectives, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to say the word grind. Your player needs a goal to work towards. And while capturing and defending bases is fun, the AI kind of limits you a little bit. And Tiny Combat Arena kind of just turns into an exercise of taking off, blowing up a few AI, landing, taking off, blowing up the AI, and just repeat that over and over and over and over again. And I don't think that that's inherently a Tiny Combat Arena problem. That's just an early access game problem in general right now. You have a lot of games that are coming out with really nice core mechanics, really wonderful ideas, but they don't have a lot of narrative design. They also don't have a good scoring system, and the gameplay just doesn't flow as well as you think it should, or as well as it should in general. And at the end of it all, Tiny Combat Arena is first and foremost a passion project, and I'm going to slide it firmly into that area because the development has been rather slow, the updates are rather lackluster, and overall there just hasn't been much change to the game over the last couple of months or even the last year. And I don't think that's super bad, but I do think passion projects do tend to take a long time to develop, and the developers tend to abandon them more frequently than something that isn't just a passion project. I'm going to sound a bit brutal right here, but the game, in my opinion, really does lack a lot of direction, and it really is mostly just a tech demonstration at the end of the day. It hasn't developed much from its early days on Reddit. While I'm sure there are like big milestones the developers hit, overall, it just is what it is. Like, the game is very minimal in like the gameplay aspect, and we really need to start seeing some developments, at least towards the single player, and maybe some of those work in progress images changed. Now, to close this video, the value and content is limited, and there's nothing fundamentally wrong or broken with TCA. There just isn't much value provided. You will never have a bad time due to performance issues, but at the same time, your fun is going to be short. So if Tiny Combat Arena is for you, you're a new simmer, not an experienced one, then I would suggest picking it up on sale for $14.99. Other than that, peace out, guys.